appreciate you joining. How do I pronounce your last name?
Morris.
Morris? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So what field of research are you in?
In neuroscience.
Neuroscience?
Yes.
What made you get into that field?
I don't know. It was kind of random. So, when I was choosing what to study, you're 18, you don't know what you want to do in your life. I was choosing between medicine and I know biotechnology and something like this. And then a friend of mine actually reached out to me. He was like, "Oh, they're opening this new faculty at the university back in Poland where I studied of neurobiology, and it's brand new. No one's ever studied this before here, so why don't you try it?" So I did, and I applied. I got into med school and there, and I was kind of choosing what to do. And I thought, this is so fascinating. Neurobiology, it sounds so interesting. Brain is just like such a complicated thing. So why not try that, And since then, I've just been doing that basically.
Nice. Do you have family members or other parts of your family that are in the same field?
Nope, nope, I'm the only one.
Dang, dude, that's legit. You make me feel like a loser, man.
Why?
So I'm in school right now for engineering, but it's not because I wanted to. It's just because it is going to open up more doors. But I'm really fascinated. I'm fascinated with people like yourself that does this type of research. Is this kind of the first thing that you've done that's gone? I don't know if it's gone viral, but it's on a lot of different news outlets. So is this one of the first studies that you've been a part of that's done
Uh,
this?
that went that widely popular? Yes, definitely. I mean, we got a note from the journal that they think that the paper is good for a press release, and I didn't think it was going to go that viral, let's say. Um, yeah, and it's been exciting. I've done some interviews, and I actually just realized that I really like communicating science to people. It's fun. It's good, and I think this is what we need to do. We're paid by the money of the taxpayers, and we kind of like stick to our own environment. No one really knows what we're doing. Only the scientists know what we're up to. So it's good to sort of go out and tell people what we do.
Yeah, I think podcasting and people. There's a lot of different podcasts now, and folks like Dr. Andrew Huberman have, I think, kind of mainstreamed the neural topic, the brain, learning about the brain. So, is he one of like your idols in the field?
Um, no, to be honest, I haven't heard of like I didn't hear of him until maybe last year, so it was brand new to me. He's definitely doing great job in his lab and communicating the science. But again, I'm also very new to this, like I don't really I have a lot of issues with scientists trying to communicate their science. I'm like because I'm a scientist, I'm very particular about how they talk about things, what they talk about, and science can be misinterpreted by everyone, and it's really difficult to communicate it. So I always, my analytical mind and my scientific mind always goes to criticize people, like always trying to find like the gaps, the holes in everything. So yeah, so I haven't really done a lot of that, like listening to science communication.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I never thought about it from that perspective, from like a normal person's non-scientist perspective. When I listen to folks like yourself talk, it's very interesting. But I don't have the capability to understand if it's bullcrap or not. So it all sounds good
And,
to me.
it's good because you can filtering this information, you see how much of the things that we hear is just wrong.
Mm.
It's just very wrong, Being in the field, knowing this, it kind of ruins your life a bit.
So what's the public perception been like since this story? I guess for folks that don't know you, well, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everyone where you work at.
Yeah, so I'm Philip. I currently work at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, and the Montreal Neurological Institute. What we're focusing at with the research group that I work in is brain mechanism, brain correlates of obesity in particular. So on the one hand, how brain can lead to obesity, but on the other hand, how obesity actually can affect the brain in a negative way.
Mm.
Um, so, the research that we're going to be talking about is about how obesity, chronic obesity that you've had for years, is a risk factor for neurodegeneration, for Alzheimer's disease, for other dementias, basically.
That's interesting. There's, right now in, I guess, the public sector, there's this body positivity movement, and accepting. It's kind of like promoting. I feel like they're promoting unhealthy bodies. So I would expect some of those people to really push back on this research that you did. Have y'all received anything like that?
No, no, no. Yeah, I was also expecting that, I was kind of thinking, we're saying that obesity is not good for you. It actually destroys your health, it destroys your cognition, it destroys your brain. What about people who kind of protect the image of obesity, of the body positivity? Um, I haven't heard from that yet, and I'm kind of torn because I don't there's nothing wrong with being obese, like the image that people might have of you, sure. I mean, this is one thing. And I think, the problem is that people with obesity are so heavily stigmatized in our society. This is also like a whole research topic. And so on the one hand, you shouldn't be doing that, obviously. On the other hand, you also have to be aware that obesity is not good for your health. It is a chronic disease that you have, and you should be at least trying to ameliorate some negative effects that it has on your health because it's associated with hypertension, type 2 diabetes. It's a constant state of body inflammation, and all those things negatively affect your health, your cognition, your brain health, your life expectancy. So we're not really talking about body image here, but you should be aware of those things as well. And I think that also the perception in society is that obesity is the fault of people who are obese. Like you don't have enough strong will to stop eating. And I think what we're also showing with other line of our research is that um, obesity. I mean, there is a consensus that obesity comes from eating more calories than you actually expend. Calories in, calories out. There's an imbalance between those two, but there's a reason why people eat more. And it's not just because you don't have enough free will or strong will to stop eating. I mean, and even if you don't, it comes from somewhere, right? It comes from your brain. So with our research, we're also trying to show that and kind of maybe help with this perception, the societal perception of people with obesity, who just, like, most of people think, oh, you're just too lazy to do something about it. But there's so much more to it.
Yeah, it's definitely a factor because the food that you consume to that leads to obesity definitely plays a role in keeping you kind of sluggish. Um, so I think that's where some of that comes in, like, oh, you're just being lazy. Um, and like you said, it's definitely a lot more complicated than that. But if you're in that cycle, it's tough to pull yourself out of that cycle and get motivated to go exercise. Is obese? I know this is kind of off topic of what you research, but is if your parents are obese, does that make you more apt to be obese? Is it hereditary? Does it run in the family?
Yeah, well, that's always an interesting question, right? Because you ask if your parents are obese, is it hereditary? There's two different effects at play, right? If your parents are obese, you are in the same environment that they are. They feed you the same food that they eat, right? So on the one hand, there's an environmental influence here. On the other hand, if your parents are obese, you have their genetics, right? So if they have the genetic predisposition to be obese, you will also have it. So that's a yes to both of that. I mean, there is an environmental effect on obesity and there is a genetic effect on obesity. In fact, we just published a study 2 months ago that showed that genetic risk of obesity in children around 10, 11 years old already is expressed in the brain and is related to higher impulsivity.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain changes in the brain that are related to your genome, basically. And you talked about this vicious cycle, that it's kind of hard to get out of it, but it's also easier for certain people to get into it. And once you're in it, it is hard to get out of it.
Is it difficult for people that have I guess, the gene to lose weight, even if, let's say this is all hypothetical, but like, let's say parents are obese when they conceive children, then they're raising kids and they become healthier. The parents become healthy, they lose weight, and the kids growing up in this healthier environment. Would that kid still be would it be tough for that person to maintain a healthy body weight because they were conceived at a time when their parents were really unhealthy?
It could be more difficult, right? So there's also a lot of changes during the fetal development in the mother's womb. There's like epigenetic influence of obesity, of maternal obesity on the fetus. So that is influencing the genetics and is influencing the future of the child. The environmental effect would be much lower then because obviously the environment is healthier, and so it's tough to say. I think it's an individual sort of predisposition and a collection of different factors. There's also socioeconomic status that influences obesity rates. There's obviously diet, physical activity, all those things. It's an insanely complicated phenomenon, to be honest. So it's really hard to answer those questions, precisely.
Yeah. Your study linking obesity and or the degeneration of the brain that you get from obesity is kind of similar to Alzheimer's. What is the definition of obesity that you use in the study? Like,
Yeah, so we define obesity in this study and in all other studies using the body mass index. So it's the ratio of your weight to your height squared. And obesity is defined as by World Health Organization and other organizations by BMI over 30 kilograms per square meter.
mm.
Um, Normal range is from 18 to 25. 25 to 30 is overweight, and obesity is everything above 30.
do,
Um,
do you know any of those numbers off the top of your head? Like if a person's 5'7", what would be considered obese? Do you know any of that?
no, no, no,
Yeah,
no.
I don't know it either, obviously, but I feel like I've looked into it and I would be considered obese. So, do you think the BMI index that we use is a good starter for people to use?
It's not a perfect measure, right? So there's a lot of limitations to BMI. One of that, one of them is there's people who have a lot of muscle mass. I'm assuming you do, and
Oh yeah, I'm just swole, man.
you look like it. And your body weight is basically a lot higher than of people who have less body mass, like the muscle mass. And if you calculate your BMI with a lot of muscle mass, it's going to show that you're obese, but in fact, you don't have a lot of fat, right? So you're actually not obese. There are other measures that are probably better. Ideally, you would measure body composition. You would have, percentage body fat or
Mm.
abdominal body fat, measures like that. But obviously, we've been studying thousands of participants, right? It's just not feasible to use all those measures in thousands of participants. It's also, you need a lot of expensive equipment to do that. So BMI is sort of a consensus that it's an okay measure for what it does. Of course, there are limitations to it, but it's better to use than any other measure. There's also a waist to hip ratio that indicates visceral adiposity, so like how the body is distributed around your waist, and this is supposed to be this is actually more predictive of negative cardiometabolic outcomes. So if you have higher visceral adiposity, you have higher chances of hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and probably brain degeneration as well. But we usually focus on BMI.
Man, it's so easy to gain weight
Yeah.
just in a short period of time. I don't know if you've witnessed this. You said you're 32 or in your 30s. When I hit my 30s, before 30, I could eat anything and I would be okay. And I maintained, a good waist. I didn't feel fat, but now it's so easy. I can go 3 days off the wagon and eating pizza and cake. And but on the flip side, it takes so long to lose that weight,
I know.
to
I know.
feel unbloated. Um, it's funny how it works that way. I don't know.
It's painful, and then you have some people who you just see them eat all the time, and even though they're 30 or 40, they eat and they eat trash. and they never gain any weight.
I know. I know. That's my wife, man. My wife can just eat whatever the hell she wants and just be skinny. I can't do that. So, what are the areas of the brain that get impacted due to obesity, and how do they correlate to Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so we found that obesity is related to decrease of cortical thickness. So, brain is enveloped by cerebral cortex, which is basically a mass of neurons that is responsible for, executive functions like memory, learning, speech, things like that. And different parts of the brain are responsible for different things. Obviously, they always, work together, kind of. So depending on the region that is changed, there will be a different function that is also related to that, right? So in obesity, we find that the main changes are in the prefrontal cortex, which is and also temporal cortex, right? So prefrontal cortex, frontal part of your brain, temporal cortex, so the side part of your brain. Um, Prefrontal cortex related to very strongly memory, executive functions. The sort of part between the prefrontal cortex and temporal cortex related to speech, to storing words, meaning of words, semantic memory, things like that. And so if you think about it, those are cognitive abilities that are already changed in Alzheimer's disease, right? The first signs of Alzheimer's disease is people start to forget some words. They don't know how to use certain words. They substitute them with something else. They lose the train of thought. Obviously, the most common symptom of Alzheimer's disease, memory loss.
Hmm.
And so if you look at the parts of the brain that are changed in Alzheimer's disease and in obesity, those are exactly the regions that are responsible for those functions, right? So obviously the changes in obesity are much, much smaller than those in Alzheimer's disease, but we find them in the same brain regions.
Is there any type of correlation from with obesity and Alzheimer's? Like being obese can lead to Alzheimer's?
Well, we don't know if it actually leads to Alzheimer's. It's hard to do studies like this, right? Because you would have to, let's say, follow up 2 million or millions of people and see, okay, you are obese. Are you going to have Alzheimer's? There are studies with large sample sizes that show that people with obesity have a higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease later in life, but there is no way to have a control group in that, right? You cannot have another cell that is not obese and being obese and then see who is going to develop Alzheimer's disease. Those studies would technically be possible in twins because in like homozygotic twins, as they have the same genotype, usually also the same environmental influence. So if one of them is obese, one of them is lean, and then you could follow them up and see if the obese one has develops Alzheimer's disease or not, and the lean one doesn't. But obviously, as they have the same genetics, they're usually both obese or one of them is obese, or both lean. So like the perfect study to actually confirm this hypothesis is almost impossible to do. So we can only sort of follow up people, say, okay, people with obesity usually have higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, but it's not a very, like, we're not 100% sure that it's going to happen when you're obese, and we cannot tell you, okay, you're obese, so you're going to get Alzheimer's disease in 5 years or something like this.
Mm. How soon can someone who is obese start feeling the effects of this? Is it immediate? I mean, how soon do the onset of these symptoms come on?
So I don't think it's immediate. It takes a while. Well, we're looking at people with chronic obesity, right? So people who presumably had obesity for at least 10 years.
Mm.
Um, there, it needs some time for obesity to affect the brain. And here's why. Obesity is related to those comorbidities that I told you about. So type 2 diabetes, hypertension, inflammation, altered levels of lipids in the blood, right? And all those things first develop a little bit after obesity develops, right? And then it takes a little bit to for those things to change the brain, to get to the brain to actually um, lead to neuronal loss or changes in the blood-brain barrier or other things that actually are related to neurodegeneration. So yeah, it's not an immediate effect.
Hmm. Is it possible for someone to reverse the impacts of obesity on the brain? Can they rebuild those parts of the brain?
Yeah, yes. So we're actually designing right now a weight loss study to see what the effects of weight loss are on brain health. But there's a lot of literature on bariatric surgery. So this is a surgery that is related that is you basically introduce a change in your GI tract. So you either dissect, you either take out the stomach or you do like a gastric bypass where, like it, the food that goes into your system omits the stomach. So it's not digested as much as it's supposed to be. People start eating much less after bariatric surgery, and they lose a lot of weight. So the weight loss is incredible. And this is done in people with morbid obesity, so with BMI probably over 40, 45. So as kind of trying to help them actually lose the weight, because the effects of obesity at this extreme end of BMI, so at very high BMI, are very negative on your health, right? It's also related to psychiatric comorbidities like depression, anxiety, and things like that. So there's a lot of talk about, and there are a lot of studies on how bariatric surgery actually affects the brain in terms of weight loss. So weight loss related to bariatric surgery, and it's very new literature showing that you can restore brain function and you can restore brain structure after bariatric surgery. Right? There is a study from colleagues of mine from up north in Quebec who tested something called brain age. So you basically compare brain age of people with obesity to brain age in a normal population, right? So obesity kind of increases your brain age. It changes your brain in a way that it seems older than it actually is.
Hmm.
After bariatric surgery, after weight loss, people lose, over 20% of their weight, which is incredibly amazing. After the weight loss, brain age actually is restored to normal, or at least, is to a younger looking brain. So yes, those changes can be reversed.
Wow. The the geriatric surgery, I want to say there's a lot of people that have gotten the surgery and I don't know what the reasons are, but they tell people not to do the surgery. Is there a negative side to getting that surgery done?
So I'm not an expert on that. I know that some people have issues with, their your stomach is much smaller, you can eat much less, right? Um, People don't like that. Some people feel like they don't have enough calories to sustain their body because they have a higher weight. Obviously, they need more calories to sustain the resting metabolic rate. So maybe it doesn't feel good. I've heard reports of some people, drinking olive oil because they just needed more calories, and it's a high shot of calories on a relatively low volume of what you're getting, right? And if your stomach is smaller, you cannot just ingest more than that. And in addition to that, a lot of people after bariatric surgery actually regain the weight after a few years. So it's a short term, short term. It's I guess relatively short term weight loss, but you do regain the weight. I don't know if actually 100% of the weight. I'm not sure on that, but some of it for sure. So maybe
Yeah.
that's also another reason why.
Yeah, I feel like it's not addressing the problem or the person's daily life, the person's routine, right? It's almost like getting a quick fix done, but it's not really addressing. I'm sure there's more that goes into. I'm sure there's programs and stuff that they put those folks through. So, but I feel like there'd be more work has to be done on the person before going that route. But it's good news that you could reverse the impacts of it. How soon is it? Pretty quick? Like you start dropping weight and then you start regaining function of the brain? Is it pretty
Yeah, I
quick?
think some changes have already been shown after 4 months, so it's pretty quick. Yeah,
Oh. And
there's
so y'all are actively doing that study, that part of the study right now.
no, so we're actually, so this is from another research group here in Canada, but we're actually right now designing a study that is revolving around those weight loss medication. So we're not going to be looking at bariatric surgery, but we're going to be looking at the weight loss medication. There's a few new drugs that, it's like subcutaneous weekly injection of a substance that is called a GLP-1 agonist. So it's a specific protein that binds in your brain and it reduces your appetite, amongst others. It's also a diabetes medication right now as well. And people lose a lot of weight on that as well. So we're going to be trying to, test people before, people who have had obesity for a while, see what their brains look like, and then have them on the drug for, I think, 80 weeks. People lose around 20% of their weight on those drugs as well. So it's amazing. And then see what changes, what in the brain changes, and if actually we can see any beneficial effects of this weight loss.
During that study, is the diet being addressed? Do they change the types of food that they eat, or is it kind of just continue with what they've been doing?
I don't think you need to. You just on this drug, you just have lower appetite in general. So you just
Wow.
eat less. It suppresses appetite amongst others. Yeah.
Well, that sounds wild. What's the negative? Are there negative? There has to be negative effects, right? There's always negative effects.
There are some, but I think the clinical trials that have been done so far show that it's a relatively safe medication. So there's some gastrointestinal complaints like diarrhea or constipation or things like that
Mm.
that are the most common side effects. Other than that, I think obviously some very very rare side effects that won't happen in almost anyone. But I think it's relatively safe actually. The problem is that people do regain weight after they stop being on the medication, right? So, and this is a problem with all interventions for obesity. Whenever you stop or you I don't know, you lose motivation to continue with a certain intervention, you will ultimately regain weight because your body has a set point. It set a weight at a certain level and it will always want to go back to that level.
Mm. That's scary. It's almost like there's nothing you could really do. Are there foods that impact the brain activity more than others? Do you know who oh man, they're gonna make me forget. Dr. Natasha Campbell is?
No, no.
No, she is the creator of the GAPS diet. And I forget what it's the gut and psychology. Yeah, GAPS, gut and psychology syndrome, I think. But she talks about like the impacts of sugar on the brain. Have y'all looked into anything like that? What sugar does or what processed food does compared to maybe like a whole foods diet?
Yeah, so I personally haven't looked at that, but it's funny that you mentioned it because I'm designing another study that
Yes.
that is supposed to look at how ultra processed food is affecting the brain.
Dude.
So we're definitely interested in that. Um, it is a thing, you know. There's a lot of studies showing that from another research group from Yale, showing that there are certain mixes of nutrients that are perceived as most palatable by people, and we kind of work most for them, or like we're willing to pay most for them. Like um, let's say mixture of carbohydrate and fat is perceived as more rewarding than just fat or just carbohydrate, right? So obviously, um, I don't know, food companies will try to produce the food that you will perceive as most rewarding, that you will, pay for and go back to, right? So there's a lot of those mechanisms that are at play. And I think food companies are using those formulas. It's very interesting review article from last year by John Speakman, who's I think in Australia. He's a nutritionist, and he talks about how the most rewarding sort of mix of nutrients, that is protein, fat, and carbs, is resembling the one that is found in breast milk.
Hmm,
So um, if you create a recipe that mimics basically the nutrient composition of breast milk, that's the winning formula, you know?
that's wild.
Yeah.
That study is going to be interesting. I, I know personally when I consume sugar or a heavy carb diet, man, I it's like my brain just shuts off. Like my whole body shuts down. I get kind of sluggish. I forget like half of the day. There's like a 3 hour window right after I eat where I don't know what happens. Like, I just get kind of sloppy and lazy. So I want like I wish we could like see it, what's going on in the brain, like, and then compare it to like a whole foods diet, like an hour after you eat a whole foods diet. What does the brain activity look like compared to what it looks like right after you eat like cake and ice cream? That would be interesting.
That would be interesting. I don't know. Maybe studies like that exist already. I just haven't come across that yet. But what we're going to be looking at is, how um, sort of chronic diet of ultra processed food affects the brain and brain structure, most importantly. But there's a few studies from Kevin Hull in the US about ultra processed food, and he has a huge metabolic ward sort of. So he feeds people ultra processed diet for, let's say, 2 weeks, and then he feeds people a healthier diet for 2 weeks, and then he looks at the differences. Those are really fascinating studies, and one of the conclusions is that when you're on ultra processed diet, you consume much more calories than when you're on a healthy diet.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder why. I wonder why that's it. Like that the whole trick of like eating fries and then like you're full, but you can immediately have ice cream right after that. Like I don't know if you've experienced that, but if I eat like a steak, like I do like the an animal based diet, and if I eat steak and eggs and like bacon or chicken or whatever, I'm pretty like satiated, and I don't have like these crazy weird cravings. But if I have pizza right after I have pizza, it's like, well, I kind of want some ice cream now. It's like my brain is wired for that reward right after I've already had some crappy food. It's pretty weird.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more you eat of those foods like pizza, chocolate, whatever, the more cravings you have, right? Like it's my personal experience. I don't know if it's scientific, but whenever I start eating sweets, let's say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I eat sweets in the afternoon. I for like 2 weeks, I cannot stop thinking about sweets, you know? But when I go over this period of not eating sweets, of like really cutting it out of my diet, the cravings are gone, basically.
Yeah. What what was the like the push to do the study comparing obesity and Alzheimer's? What was the curiosity there?
We actually, it was based on a previous study that we published in 2021, where we looked at, in a very large sample of, I think, over 20,000 people, we looked at the effects of body mass index or obesity generally, because we used other measures as well, on brain, on the gray matter and on the white matter, and what are the factors that kind of mediate this relationship, right? So again, the diabetes, hypertension, inflammation. And so we saw in this study that the brain regions that are affected by obesity were visually kind of similar to the ones that are affected by Alzheimer's disease.
Hmm.
Um, and we just went on to do this study, and like formally statistically actually compare those things, Alzheimer's disease and obesity. And it's fabulous that there are a lot of available data sets right now in the world. There's a study of Alzheimer's disease where you have, I think, 1,000 of people with Alzheimer's disease, and you have their brain imaging data that you can access. There's the UK Biobank data set where you have, I think, 50,000 people with brain imaging data. And thanks to those things, you can really dig deep into a lot of different diseases and correlations between them. So we kind of wanted to also use those opportunities that are there.
Knowing what you know, Philip, is there anything special that you do in your daily life that you've learned along the way? And you're like, well, this is really bad for my brain health, so I'm not going to do this. Do you do anything special?
No, no. I mean, I am obsessed with my health and my diet and my body image, but that's for a different reason. That's not because I know that it's unhealthy. I have been overweight I was overweight as a child, maybe even obese. So I guess it comes from there. Um, since then, I managed to keep a healthy weight. Um, I think I would start being worried if I were kind of getting into the overweight kind of territory. Um, but so far, no. But definitely, um, I am aware of those things, and
Yeah.
I do try to have a healthy diet. I do try to eat less processed foods, obviously, because I know that it will lead to me eating more processed food, and so I think the best strategy is prevention. You just prevent to not even go there. Um,
Do you drink coffee?
no,
No?
no,
Is that a reason related to your brain?
no, I just don't like the taste.
Really? Not even like something from Starbucks, like a little sweet coffee?
No, no, no. I
Dang,
just
man.
the only time that I like the taste of coffee is in tiramisu.
Ah, that is really good. I haven't had that in a while. Yeah, I e- I don't know. Like one week, a study will come out saying how caffeine in black coffee is going to save your health and your life, and it's really good for your brain. And then the very next week, it's like, nope, coffee is so bad for you, and it's killing your brain cells. So, what's the latest on that? Give me the details.
I don't know. And this is the problem with science. I told you before about the like science communicators. You can communicate whatever you want based on the science that there is. And it's a science that is published in, good peer-reviewed journals. People, you can write a book on, I don't know, association between obesity and the brain, and you can say obesity is great for the brain, and you can say obesity is bad for the brain, based on the science, or that there is no evidence for obesity and brain relationship kind of thing. So there's a lot of individual interpretation going on.
Mm.
And there's always been, there are studies who are showing that red wine is great for you. Um,
Yeah,
it,
good for your heart, right?
it is not. And just because people, I don't know, used wrong methods wrong statistics, or they didn't think of certain details, while conducting a study.
Yeah.
So you really need to be careful with what you read. You need to be careful with your sources. And you need to, trust people that you listen to.
The red wine is interesting because how wine is made is one of the most unnatural ways that we could possibly consume something. As and the toxic chemicals that are laced on grapes and sprayed on the vineyards, like that mantra, like a glass of red wine a day keeps the doctor away. Like to me, that sounds crazy.
It is a bit, right? I mean, alcohol is never good for you. I don't know what the quantities are. I think recently Canada came up with changed guidelines for alcohol consumption. I think it's now 2 drinks per week. It was 15, and they reduced it to two.
15
So
drinks a week.
yeah,
Oh, that's funny.
um, I mean, it's like the maximum amount, right? So that was supposed to be not unhealthy,
Mm.
and now they changed it to two. So now that's a massive difference, like 7 time difference. So I think that the evidence is showing that alcohol is really bad for us.
Yeah. Are you interested or have any plans doing studies on how psychedelics impact the brain or marijuana, or have you been involved in the past in anything?
I haven't been involved in that, but I certainly find it interesting. But sadly, I haven't had the chance to do it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious. There's a lot of science and a lot of different podcasts that I've listened to that say, that rave about the benefits of psychedelics and what it does to your brain. But I find it wild that those drugs are illegal. Meanwhile, we can go get alcohol and we know the negative impacts of what alcohol does to our bodies and our brains and every cell in our body. But something like marijuana, I guess marijuana is becoming legal in more states and countries, but to me that's still like a wild comparison.
Yeah, I think it's probably a cultural thing, right? I mean, wine has been there since the old ages, right? So I think that's probably why. I don't know. I mean, it's a completely different debate, right? Alcohol, I think, is the second most addictive substance after heroin, probably, as far as I remember from my undergrad class. Um, So yeah, it's definitely it's wild that there are such differences, you know.
Do you, being a researcher in your field, do you get pressured by uh, people that have great influence on the research that you're putting out? The funders that are backing the science, do you get pressure to write science a particular way?
No, fortunately not, because we're not sponsored by any private institutions. We're sponsored by the government, by governmental funds and so on. So fortunately, I haven't had that yet. But I know that you know, there are people who were, for example, sponsored by Coca-Cola, I think, and they were doing some obesity research, and the Coca-Cola pulled out funding because they didn't like the results.
Well, Coca,
So you know, it can happen, but fortunately, it didn't happen to me yet.
that's good. Coca-Cola is wild, man. They have stickers on their vending machines that say balance is key or something like that. Like, you can drink Coca-Cola and be healthy as long as you're active. Like they display it on a nice little sticker. And I'm not like I drink Coke sometimes, but I'm not crazy about it. But it's like they're they're doing a good job marketing. Even like, people that say like or how we say fat free is really good for you and fat free is so much healthier. Like that marketing that comes out from the food industry is pretty darn good.
It is, yeah. But like how healthy, how active do you have to be actually be able to drink Coke without consequences, right? I mean, it's just sugar.
Yeah.
Um, and I know, you know, there are some elite sports people who I know I love tennis, so I watch a lot of it. And there's a Canadian tennis player who just drinks maple syrup in the breaks because he needs the energy, you know, and it's just pure
No.
sugar almost. So sure, you can drink Coke when you're super active and it won't have any consequences on your health, but you have to be very active to be able to burn all those calories, right?
There's a CrossFitter. I forget who it was. It was the big guy. I don't know if you watch CrossFit or not, but the guy after Rich Froning, I forget. I think his name's Matt. But he said that he ate a Snickers bar after every event because it gave his energy back and it made him feel good. And this apparently there's some science backing that. Like I think Floyd Mayweather drinks a Coke after a training session, which is pretty wild, right?
I mean, you know, there are situations where you can get a Coke, obviously. I mean, for type 1 diabetes people, when the sugar is low, they can drink Coke because it's sugar that is available immediately. It gets into your blood that quickly. So, you know, um, but obviously, I think you know, I'm from Europe, right? So we always hear about the massive portion sizes in America and the large soda sizes that you have in America. And so this is a big problem, right? I think you go to the cinema, you get like a 1.5 liter of Coke, and then you drink it during one movie. It's like, what the
I know.
hell?
I know. So yeah, what is it like even at movie theaters? Because we went just a couple weeks ago, me and my family, and that I don't know how big it was, but it was huge. Like it was big enough to feed my or for my wife, my older daughters. I have two of them, and then I have a set of twins, and it was like big enough for all of us. The entire movie. Is
Yeah.
that not what the normal for y'all?
Not in Poland at least. I remember the largest one was 1 liter. So I don't know how it translates to units that you use in the US. Sorry for that. But it's like I don't know, like maybe that big, like this. It's not a lot. It's like a medium bottle of water, basically. I mean, that was the largest one. So it's a bit different.
Hmm. I wonder which country is the most unhealthiest. If you looked at, I don't know what, I guess BMI, would that be the best way to measure health? Maybe not, but I wonder which country is probably the leading the way when it comes to most unhealthy population.
That's a good question, and it's a question I cannot answer, sadly. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, obesity rates are through the roof, and I think in population wide, I think there's over 60% of people who are now overweight or obese, right? And you know, Canada, the US are somewhere up there for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a common belief amongst Americans that, Europe has the healthiest population. I don't know if that's true or not, but
no, I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, it comes with the development of the countries, right? I think UK is probably relatively unhealthy. Um, I don't know about other, but I think obesity rates in Europe are becoming comparable to America. So, but then there are societies, where being obese is actually perceived as a sign of high socioeconomic status, right? So you want to be obese.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
like what, like the back in the, I don't know, like the king days and the Roman Empire, weren't like kings and queens real fat and obese?
yeah, I think so because it was kind of showing that they have enough food, they have enough money, and it shows it, that your status is high, right? So, and there are still those societies. Like a friend of mine went to for a research trip to I think Samoa, was it? Where um, the notion is still, if you're more obese, you have a higher status,
Mm.
um, and it's probably not good.
Yeah. Well, any other, so you mentioned that you're working on another study. Is there anything or any other study that you got in the works that will be coming out soon?
Not anytime soon, but we're also looking again at children, and how, all those factors that we talked about before, like education, environment, diet, but also genetic risk and brain structure as well. How all those factors sort of together can influence obesity, and we want to look at children in like a longitudinal fashion, right? So we're gonna have a few time points where we look at them and see how they develop their weight
Mm.
and see whether the factors from baseline can predict the weight development in the children, right? So I think this is not a lot of people, not a lot of studies do that yet, unfortunately, because it's obviously very, very expensive, very time consuming, very labor intense to follow up people for, let's say, 8 years, right? It takes first 8 years of doing a study, and then you need to analyze the data and so on. Um, but I think this is the way to go in the future. So we're trying to kind of get in there and see whether, let's say your genetic risk mixed with your diet can predict if you're going to be obese or not. Um, so, so that's one thing. Again, we're looking at obesity from two different perspectives, right? So it's like how brain can be a risk factor for obesity and how obesity affects the brain negatively. And so that's, I guess, the risk part. Um, yeah, I think that I told you about two, three new studies that we're doing. So
Do you
that's
have
already a lot.
any do you have any aspirations to write a book about any of this, that you're at the end of the road once you have like these, because they seem kind of centered around obesity, health. Do you have and how it impacts the brain? Do you have any aspirations to write a book?
Yes, I thought about it. My book would be sort of like um, touching on the issues of obesity in the brain, but it would also touch on the scientific issues. So, as we discussed, like science can be interpreted in so many ways. So I want to write a book that, like you open it, and you read, okay, obesity is related to the brain. Then you flip it around, you open it from the other side, and there's evidence for the opposite,
Oh
also based on
wow.
science.
Oh dude, you're killing me, man. So what do I believe?
I don't know. I don't know, honestly. I mean, I think people are more and more aware of those issues in science. There has been a massive reproducibility crisis kind of alert in the last few years about science, that many of the studies that have been published are not reproducible. If you do the same study again, it will not show you the same results because maybe the statistics was wrong. Maybe the sample size was too low, right? You need hundreds and thousands of people for reliable results.
Mm.
And people do studies in like a group of 20 people and then generalize it to the whole population, right? This used to be the case. I think this is slowly changing, and people are becoming more and more aware of those issues. So hopefully in the future it will get a bit better, right? But again, a lot of people, a lot of science communicators base their claims on studies that were done in the 90s or early 2000s, and those are studies that are not necessarily of the best quality. So it's it's hard, not because even being a scientist, I sometimes don't know what to believe or not.
Yeah. Well, data is crazy. So I work in a corporate setting, spreadsheets and data analytics. And things could be modified on spreadsheets. Like data could be modified in a way where it completely changes the narrative of a story. And you're not lying, you're just manipulating the data a little bit. You're not necessarily leaving things out. You're just changing the way the data looks to change the narrative to what you want. And I'm assuming that's what happens in science as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many names for it that people came up with. Like p hacking or garden of forking paths, where you can choose different types of analyses to do, and then come up with two different results with the same data set. Or, some people say, if you torture the data enough, it will confess to whatever you want it to confess.
Oh God, that's scary, dude. Oh, well,
And you work with people like that, and they're actually excited to say that. Oh my God, I managed to find this effect that I wanted to find, and this is not what you're supposed to be doing.
no, not at all. That's sketchy, man. Well, Philip, dude, I greatly appreciate this conversation. I think the work you're doing is very important. It's
Yeah,
fascinating to me, and I like talking with folks like yourself because I get just a little bit smarter every time. So I appreciate it, man.
yeah, of course. It was a pleasure. It was really nice conversation. Thanks so much.
Yeah, do you have a social media or anything like that where people can follow you?
Yeah.
What can
Um,
you yeah,
I'm on Twitter. That my handle is Filip K Morris. So my first name, my last name, and the K in between.
okay.
Um, yeah, I guess that's the best way to
Okay.
connect.
Awesome, man. Well, I'll link that in the show notes and then I'll shoot you an email whenever this episode's ready. Yeah, man, I had fun. I appreciate the time.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Appreciate you. Have a good one.
All right, take care. Bye.